Hello, ma'am. This
Hi,
is
Maria.
Rasesh from
Hi,
BYJU'S.
Ravi.
Thank
Hi.
you so much, ma'am, for joining us. We were conducting a series of lectures for the preparation of interviews, whoever is doing it for the upcoming examinations.
Fine.
So this is where we needed your help. That there would be many questions that would be asked to these students that if they are looking at the environment, how exactly do they see their role? So, ma'am, the first question that I had is that when we look at development and when we look at environment, getting together with development and environment and protecting the environment at the same time is a big challenge that especially the bureaucrats would have. So whether you look at all the projects which come in the way, or a lot of reports which are saying that okay, the number of leopards, for example, ma'am, we saw a very recent report that number of leopards are increasing. So when these two go hand in hand, how exactly do we tackle these things? How do we see development and protection of environment going at the same time, ma'am?
So currently, the environment and development issue is not going together. Actually, right now, they are development projects are being done at the cost of environment, and this is because the decision making, which would have helped to improve environmental protection, is actually broken. So, the way to do environment and development together is actually to strengthen decision making. And that's important for bureaucracy to understand, because the reason why the environmental impact assessment procedures came into India, or the reason why the wildlife clearance systems came to India, or the reason why coastal zone regulatory appraisal systems came in, was essentially to try and mitigate the environmental impact of bad development. And where the impact could not be handled, the project would be rejected. And in most other cases, when the project is allowed to go ahead, there would be conditions set on how to improve the environment, how to mitigate the damages. Now, this is really the framework for decision making. Unfortunately, in the past 15 years, we have disabled these decision making systems. And we have done that deliberately. And we have done that by one, weakening the institutions that would take those decisions. So, um, the independence of the decision making process has been weakened over time. So, the Environmental Appraisal Committee, for instance, is today headed by people who have clear conflict of interest. They have no accountability, they have no transparency. Essentially, it is based on poor governance principles. Now, the minute you have poor governance principles, you have poor and weak democratic systems operating, you essentially have closed door decision making, which are compromised and which in this case will be pushed more for development rather than for environment. And that is really what is today the core of the problem. So the core of the problem is not that environment and development have to work against each other. The core of the problem is the decision making, which would help us to take those decisions, which would get the environmental safeguards in place and development to proceed. Now, it's also a fact that the environmental decision making has become extremely convoluted, has become corrupt, and often delays the project from getting completed. This is also wrong. So, I think what we are really looking at is a complete breakdown in this decision making. And that is why today environment and development do not go together. In fact, environment and development are working against each other.
So for the people, ma'am, for example, the civil servants, the upcoming civil servants whom we are also in touch with, how should they go about their proceedings? How should they look at their job so that they make a difference?
Very good question. I think for me, the biggest lesson is that they need to protect the democratic framework of this country, which really is about the different pillars. Each pillar is seen to be important. The bureaucracy has a critical role to play. It plays a very important role in the management of affairs, in the governance system. But the bureaucracy cannot do its job unless the judiciary, the media, the civil society, the parliamentarians, they all play their role. And what we are seeing today is the weakening of these institutions. And that, I think, is also making the bureaucracy less able to function in the way it should. I have myself seen for the last 30 years, the bureaucracy is finding it more and more difficult today to do the work that they are supposed to do. And I find the bureaucracy has some extraordinarily good people who should be given the right to actually do good governance, good development, but they don't have the operating space today. So I think good bureaucracy, the bureaucracy in the future needs to demand that space. And that space can only come when every part of democracy is strengthened.
Ma'am, one more question that we had was that now in this year we have seen the pandemic COVID-19.
Yeah.
So after COVID-19, probably environmentalism needs to be looked at in a very different manner. And perhaps we also have an opportunity to rethink over the things that we have been doing. So how exactly do you think environmentalism is going to work in the post-COVID era? What are the things that we should do?
See, what COVID has taught us is the massive disruption that this one little virus has brought to the world economy. It has brought the world economy to its knees. Now, what is very clear is that that kind of disruption also awaits us when we look at climate change. Already, you are seeing enormous weather disturbances across the world. It is leading to extreme weather events, huge amount of, in India, we are seeing intense or extreme rainfall. So this leads to the prospect of more flood, more drought. It isn't as if we've not had floods and droughts in the past, but it's exacerbating the impacts of floods and drought. So what is very clear is that even as we are seeing the COVID-19 disruption, there is another disruption that awaits us. And that tells us that when we are looking at the future, we need to do two things. One, we need to strengthen rural economies and build the resilience of very poor people. Now, this is something that is very important for environment because today, the weakening and the complete loss of the agrarian economic base is basically driving more and more people to cities. The migration levels have gone up, and this will increase with climate change. So here is an opportunity post-COVID, and especially as a large numbers of migrants went home, here is an opportunity to actually reinvest in rural economies, to build the resilience of people, do more rainwater harvesting, more water management, more agricultural investment, more creation of well-being in rural areas so that people leave only if they have to leave. And you create a resilience there to be able to cope with disasters. Now, that's a very big opportunity that you have post-COVID. And you also have an opportunity where countries are going to invest in rebuilding their economies post-COVID, is to use the green stimulus to actually improve, invest in a different energy system, in a more equitable energy system. Because the other thing that COVID has taught us is that COVID actually magnifies the inequities in our world. I mean, today, where the virus is breeding is where the poor people live, where you have large amount of congestion, no water supply. And that's really going to make the entire world vulnerable. So I think here is an opportunity also for us to rethink the way we do urban development. What do sustainable cities mean? How can you actually invest better in rebuilding both affordable and sustainable city, as well as a resilient rural economy?
So, ma'am, one more question I had, which is kind of related to what we were just talking about. And this is with respect to, you have been talking about environmentalism of the rich versus the poor. In your books also, you have written this, that you had given one case study also that in the early 90s, there was one report from the US where it was mentioned that poor are actually more responsible for all the issues related to the environment. But rather, we have found out that it's not the poor, but rather the rich. And here, even the development model of what we consider as development is the Western model of development. So you had spoken about these things. So how do you see the role of the governments like the countries like India or China, so that they go in a very sustainable manner?
Our governments are realizing today, and I think that's a big change that has happened over the years. Our governments are realizing today that the development model of the West is not appropriate for us, that it is very high in capital, very high in resources that we do not have. And it creates huge amount of waste, huge amount of inequity, huge amount of effort has to go to clean it up. So I think governments are recognizing it. Where the problem is the inability to be able to truly invest in an alternate model. Now, the trouble with this word alternate model is that nothing like that exists in the world. And there is no one model, because otherwise you're dividing the world between the Soviet Union, the socialist model, and the capitalist model, which I do not want to do. I think what we are looking for is appropriate solutions, and that's where the answer will lie. There is no ism here. There is only the fact that you have to do development which is affordable, and if it is affordable, it will be sustainable. So, if that is the principle of operation, you will start looking at what to do. And that's what we talked about. I mean, how do you deal with air pollution? You deal with air pollution by investing in public mobility. How do you invest in public mobility that it is affordable for the poorest and yet convenient and modern for the richest? That's the ism that we need to talk about. So the ism is implementation. Ism is standing behind solutions that can meet the needs of all. And that's really where I think the new model, or whatever, the old model, the new model, really has to stand different.
So one question that I had was related to the network that we have, protected area network we have for the wildlife conservation. So do you think it is doing justice to what is required? Because on one hand, we see all the reports where the numbers are rising, but at the same time, habitat fragmentation is also happening because of all the projects which are being taken. So do you think whatever we are doing for wildlife conservation is enough, or there are amendments which are required here?
I don't know if you know, but I was heading a task force set up by the UPA government to look at tiger conservation post the Sariska debacle. Dr. Manmohan Singh had asked me to chair this task force, and I had given a report called Joining the Dots,
Yes, ma'am.
which I had argued that, and I still argue, and I believe very strongly that a country like India cannot do conservation in the Western model of protecting wilderness areas for animals. You will have to take into account the needs of your very poor communities who live in the habitat of animals as well. And today, what's happening, if you look at it, is the problem is that you have habitat fragmentation happening. You also have great alienation of the local people around the habitats that exist. So, what you're doing is to protect wildlife almost as you were protecting them in zoos. So, your sanctuaries and, and national parks have become large zoos where you have ring fenced the area and you have very high levels of protection to keep the animals safe. But the fact is that if you want large numbers of animals, I mean, if you want the wild animal population to increase in India, you will have to build a coexistence agenda in which people benefit from wildlife. And we haven't done that yet. Around all the sanctuaries and national parks, it is the hotels that benefit, and people like me or you go in and enjoy the animals. But the local people actually lose out because they do not have even rights of development around that area, and they do not get benefits of conservation or tourism. So we have to change this model, and only then can you build the interests of people in wildlife and actually operate a wildlife conservation system which is much more sustainable and for a country like India.
One more thing was about COVID-19, that all of a sudden, because of COVID, the amount of plastic waste, biomedical waste has been increasing a
Mm.
lot. And we really are not even thinking of it, and probably because of all the things that are going on. So, has it taken us away from all the things that we were thinking of about pollution and how to tackle them and everything, both
Well,
at individual and government level?
no, I think that concerns us. I mean, at the end of the day, pre COVID, there was a lot of concern about plastic waste, and a lot of us had become very conscious of plastic. And then COVID has come. And COVID has actually meant greater use of plastic because you need to protect yourself. And that has meant massive amounts of plastic waste, which is adding to the burden of cities for its management. And it has also pushed back the agenda of plastic waste management. I mean, you will recall that our Prime Minister talked about getting rid of single use plastic by 2022. 2022 is just 2 years away. We do not have the beginnings even of the regulations that will get rid of single use plastic. Now, the answer to plastic waste has to be threefold. One, that you get rid of what cannot be recycled, number one. Number two, you segregate at the household level so that, or at the institution level, so that that plastic that can be recycled can actually go into a waste management or waste processing system. And thirdly, you need to start incentivizing all the plastic waste management organizations, which are working in the informal sector and working in very, very bad labor conditions, to actually improve their working conditions so that they can manage and reprocess our plastic waste. We're doing neither one of those. All three parts of our agenda have actually got disrupted because of COVID-19. So I hope that in the coming year, many of these issues will come back on the table.
And one last question is about a way forward that we have, for example, the people living in the cities, that at their level, what are the things that they can do on their, let's say, in their lifestyles and anything, so that they can just play their role in the conservation of the environment?
It's a very good question. I think what I would really argue is that I would say is that each one of us has to become responsible, and to be responsible, we have to know what is the impact of our lifestyle on the environment. What is it that we can do to minimize our footprint? What is it that we can do to be able to deal with our own waste in our own houses, whether it's to recycle, minimize, compost, whether it is to do rainwater harvesting, whether it's to do waste management. But beyond a point, really, as individuals, we are helpless. The system has to be geared towards creating the environmental sustainability. We can't beyond a point. I mean, I would love to tell you, take a bus. I would love to take a bus myself, but the buses don't operate in my city. So what can I do? So I think you need to be able to create the conditions in which we can also play a bigger role in protecting the environment.
Thank you so much for joining me,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
This is kind of
Thank
a
you.
fan moment for me as well, that I'm interacting with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you.